Hello, M&T students. At this point, you are familiar with what the nutrition care process is, and we have talked about the importance of using the new standardized terminology. Using the same terms is key in making sure we are achieving our patients' goals and that all on that healthcare team are really clear in what they are saying, even amongst dietitians themselves. So in this presentation, I want to walk through the online manual because sometimes students just don't want to take that dive in. And once you get in there, you can see the benefit of learning this language in greater detail. So first off, we need to log in, and this is your Academy Nutrition number, and then the password. Okay, and here is the online manual. So you can see that I'm logged in, and you can get a lot of information just at this top, but this isn't actually the manual itself. But one thing I want to point out, because students always ask, is how to cite the content. So in the About tab, you can see that they're citing content examples. So I just wanted to highlight that as we go in. Now, to actually launch the manual, we need to hit launch the publication, and it automatically comes up in English. So you don't have to do anything else there. And now we're in. I'm going to scroll down, and you can see the different tabs up here. But first, what I want to say is stay out of the search box. So many times students want to search a keyword, and this is great once you have learned to use the manual. But first, we really need to stay out of that and instead learn how to use the manual effectively and learn how to use and integrate the language in the nutrition care process. If you are always searching for keywords, you will miss out on making connections. Okay, so here we are at the nutrition care process tab. This is where you can read through the background on each of the different steps. So again, I'll just open up the nutrition assessment snapshot. And this is the one-pager we viewed in class to keep us on track with what nutrition assessment is. And you can click through each page here and go through the introduction of nutrition assessment. Again, very key information to use, and the different steps. And so we are in nutrition assessment, and what's coming up as we go page by page is all these different categories. It looks like a lot, but each one is only about a page worth of information. So when I assign background reading in the online manual for assessment, this is what I expect you to go through and read through each area here. Same for when we go over nutrition diagnosis. And again, when you first click on it, it's the snapshot that pops up as we discussed in class. And then it goes through the introductions, what's new, and different categories. Okay, so the background is all within the nutrition care process tab. The next tab we have is terminology. And this tab are the quick links to the term sheets, which are the lists of standard terms for each of the steps, as you can see here. So in assessment, if I click that directly, it will take us to the overview. And within the assessment, of course, we have our different categories of assessment data that we can look at. And in the online version of the manual, you can click on each one of these blue links and it'll take you to the direct list of the different terms. I'm highlighting this because you can also download and print and save a hard copy of the nutrition assessment and monitoring and evaluation terminology. So these are the lists that it's nice to have at your fingertips, especially when we are discussing things in class for the next year of M&T. So please take a minute, go there and download them. And then we're right here in assessment. And those are the different categories. So if you want to look closer to anthropometrics, we could click here directly. And here, again, is that list of anthropometrics. and every blue link will take you to its actual definition and reference sheet of body composition, growth, and weight history of what I just clicked on. So the terminology link gives you direct access to the term list. Again, here I'll click on the diagnosis. And so these are the actual problems, the P's of the PES statement. Again, please print the nutrition diagnostic terminology list. So we have those at our fingertips for class. Okay. Next, we'll review the Reference Sheets tab. Now this is the tab where I spend most of my time in this manual. Writing good nutrition diagnosis statements is easy, but writing the best fit PES is challenging. So these reference sheets help you think through and connect the dots from assessment all the way to figuring out what the best nutrition diagnosis is. So, for example, I'm going to stay in diagnosis. So this is where we build our PES statements. And many of our patients that we'll talk about just aren't eating enough for all the different reasons. And so they have some sort of problem with an inadequate intake. So inadequate intake, as the P, would fall within the intake domain, as you remember. And so clicking in the intake domain lists all the terms, or the P's, associated with their definition. And again, the blue links will take you directly to its reference sheet. So inadequate intake. So why don't we call it inadequate oral intake? That would be the problem statement. And with its definition, so I'm going to click there so we can get to the actual reference sheet. So here is the reference sheet for inadequate oral intake. Now that is the standardized terminology that we have to use verbatim in our medical documentation. So the reference sheet provides a definition. So oral food and beverage intake that is less than established reference standards. That's what, I guess we could guess that, but that is the standard language definition. After the definition, it lists the etiology. Now the etiology, as you remember, is the reason why that problem exists. So on the reference sheet, it lists the possible etiologies, and it's a nice quick bulleted list. So sometimes someone may not be able to eat enough because their body has physiological causes increasing their needs. So maybe they're suffering from a prolonged catabolic illness like cancer, and they just can't eat enough. Or they have a decreased ability to consume, or they have lack of access to food. So maybe, they're more than willing to eat, but they just don't have enough to eat. Cultural practices or a knowledge deficit can be problematic as well of getting enough. Or psychological causes like depression or disordered eating, which would be the reason why they have an inadequate oral intake. And finally, what's listed on the reference sheet are the signs and symptoms that prove that the problem exists. So the S of the PES statement. So again, what's listed here is the assessment data that shows that the person has an inadequate oral intake. And so we can guess that when you're not eating enough, you can have weight loss. You may show signs of dehydration for not getting enough to drink, or a change in appetite or taste. You may have outright clinical signs and symptoms of a vitamin or mineral deficiency that we see in the nutrition-focused physical findings aspect of assessment. And the food and nutrition-related history of assessment, this is where we can estimate that they are truly not taking in enough calories or protein from their diet compared to what their requirements are. Or there's some sort of limited economics, or medications are causing side effects that's causing anorexia, and then client history of conditions like a protein nutrient malabsorption that could be related to the cause of inadequate oral intake. So these reference sheets are important in figuring out which problem is best. And what you see here is a blank for the biochemical data or lab values, because there is just no lab that we can look at that is proof that they're not eating enough. So this is where we can build on our critical thinking and trying to align what our assessment data is really telling us. And this is just the reference sheet for inadequate oral intake. Again, so in the diagnosis, we're in the intake section and we're just at one of them. We could look at maybe a behavioral or environmental domains, and their lists, again, all the different domains are listed, each of the P's are listed, and then you can connect to their reference page. Okay, so what you have probably noticed already is that there are many ways to find the same information in this online manual. You can click around in terminology and end up at a reference sheet. So these are very similar, it's just set up differently. Now, the last thing I want to highlight are the matrices. And this is the best part of the online manual versus any kind of print. So at the matrices, there's two versions. There's the nutrition assessment matrix and the nutrition diagnosis etiology matrix. So let's click on the assessment matrix first. So in assessment, we are gathering information from all the different categories of assessment, which you recognize here. And the different categories of assessment, sometimes, it's hard to see where they cluster to tell you what problem really exists. So this assessment matrix allows you to click through your assessment data to figure out what P it aligns. So in anthropometrics, again, you could look at body mass if you have information about BMI, decreased or increased. What shows up is the long list of different P's for the nutrition diagnosis that, a decrease in BMI may show up as a sign or symptom of these different P's. So you could, look at some data in anthropometrics. And then maybe you have a nutrition-related diet history, intake, or activity. So food intake, alcohol intake, maybe it's excessive. So again, that assessment data may align best to one of these P's. So you can use your assessment data to try to figure out what P it's clustering around. The other matrix is the nutrition diagnosis etiology matrix. And this is fun because sometimes you just know after you do your comprehensive assessment really the reason why the person's having a problem. So maybe the problem is, the person just isn't able to meet their goals because they don't have a social support system at home. And so that's the reason why. So you can go to the etiology and look through the different categories and, social support. So maybe it's in the social personal category of etiology. And you look in there, and lack of social support for implementing changes, that seems to be the reason why they're not meeting their nutrition goals. So you click on there, and what do you get? A list of possible P's. So maybe a limited adherence to nutrition-related recommendations could be a good P. Or they're just not ready for diet and lifestyle changes. So it narrows down, the 100+ different P's out there to a few. And then the key thing is to look and click on one of those. And where does it take you? The full reference sheet. In here, you can look at all the possible signs and symptoms of assessment data to see if this is a good fit. So maybe we are not meeting our lipid goals or our weight goals, and then they're having inability to really recall what we've just talked about. Maybe they're not completing their homework as agreed upon. And so if a bunch of data starts clustering here, that's pretty good proof that we're at a best fit P. and we can structure very strong PES.